150th birthday of Sierra Club founder John Muir brought environmentalists out in protest today throughout the West. In San Francisco, Smokey the Bear tried to resign from the Forest Service. Smokey was actually an environmental protester in a bear costume. In Los Angeles, members of Earth First dressed as trees during a demonstration at the Federal Building. In Spokane, environmentalists sang songs and delivered garbage to a Forest Service office. Garbage, they say, is left in the woods by loggers, cattle grazing, and herbicides. There was also a demonstration in our area today. It was on the edge of the embattled North Kalmiopsis roadless area, about 30 miles west of Grants Pass. As Gail Jackson reports, the protesters opposed the cutting of timber on public lands.
Cross right over the gate here. Yeah, let's go right over it.
Members of Earth First and other environmental groups walked along the Bald Mountain Road atop Flat Top Mountain, planting trees and protesting what they call a planned annihilation of the North Kalmiopsis roadless area by the Forest Service.
It looks like that's what's going on. I mean, when you look at what they're planning on doing, which is putting in roads, a lot of roads going in, which basically disqualifies it from being a roadless area, which means it can never be permanently protected as wilderness.
The North Kalmiopsis is once again embroiled in controversy. The Siskiyou National Forest has proposed building roads into the area to log timber killed by last summer's devastating silver fire.
We don't think that with the preferred alternative that we're annihilating anything in the North Kalmiopsis. Obviously, we're proposing to put roads in, and we're proposing to do some harvesting of the dead timber that's out there. But as far as annihilating, no, we don't agree with that.
They're out to mug a burn victim.
Activist Lou Gold of Tequilma took part in the peaceful protest. Gold has maintained a vigil atop Bald Mountain many summers in the past.
Say to anyone, what would you do to take care of your family? And they will say, anything that's necessary. I will do anything that's necessary to defend Bald Mountain.
This is one of the first trees that comes in after a fire. By the industry, it's considered a weed or a useless species. But just because it doesn't have economic value doesn't mean it doesn't have any value.
Environmentalists claim the timber salvage issue is being used as a convenient way to solve the problem of the North Kalmiopsis once and for all. They have many so-called actions planned for the coming months.
Legal and illegal actions, lawsuits, anything we can on all fronts to preserve what wilderness remains here.
You wouldn't know it by the weather or by the snow on the ground, but this demonstration kicks off what environmentalists promise will be a long, hot summer in the North Kalmiopsis. On Flat Top Mountain, Gail Jackson reporting, Channel 10 News.
Environmentalists have lost a battle in federal court. In Portland, Judge Helen Fry has dismissed a lawsuit by a coalition of environmental groups saying the legislation pressed by Senator Mark Hatfield prohibits the suit. Environmentalists had challenged the BLM's timber management plans for its Western Oregon districts. They claim that new information developed since the plans were adopted revealed increasing threats to the northern spotted owl. But Judge Fry ruled that language inserted by Senator Hatfield in a continuing resolution adopted by Congress last December prohibits such lawsuits.
Staged all across the country. Locally, members held a 5-mile protest walk demonstrating against a Forest Service preferred plan of building 20 miles of roads in the North Kalmiopsis wilderness area. That plan is part of the Silver Fire Recovery Plan. Today's protest ended with no arrest.
Ultimately, somebody could be martyred in this whole event.
Earth First was organized 8 years ago to speak out for the most radical fringes of the environmental movement, to support saboteurs called ecotours who have burned helicopters and damaged bulldozers to save the wilderness. Earth First founder Dave Foreman believes the laws of nature are higher than the laws of man.
Human beings have no right, no God-given right to totally pave, to totally destroy, to totally use, to totally manipulate every square inch of this planet.
Earth First says its acts of civil disobedience are necessary because discussion and negotiation have failed. Mainstream environmentalists say Earth First is giving the entire movement a bad name.
I reject out of hand their being environmentalists. They're terrorists, they're outlaws, and they should be treated as such.
I think the real terrorists are the ones who are threatening the viability of this ecosystem, and those are the people right now who are logging.
Whether terrorists or freedom fighters, Earth First says it will continue this summer's campaign of conservation through confrontation, attempting to save the wilderness and man from himself, vowing to live up to its motto, no compromise in the defense of Mother Earth. Ken Kashiwahara, ABC News in Southern Oregon.
Howls filled the air this morning where usually the hum of chainsaws are heard. The radical environmental group Earth First converged on a logging operation in the Siskiyou National Forest in an effort to shut it down.
Old growth is sacred. We need to pass it on to our children and their children.
Protesters climbed onto a yarder while it was still running, a feat considered very dangerous.
They're strapped to the drums now. If the air bleeds off, well, then they could get killed very easily.
5 women and 1 man handcuffed, clamped, and chained themselves to the log mover in the 5th civil disobedience action by Earth First since spring. They say the old-growth trees here should be saved for future generations by making this area a national park.
It's one of the most biologically diverse forests in the whole North American continent, and we should be saving this area for our grandchildren and not clear-cutting it.
I think they should have went to the source. That's like fighting a war or something. You don't go out there after it's already started. You stop it before it gets started.
Yet Earth Firsters say they've tried formal protest, but that didn't stop the logging. When sheriff officials arrived, chains were cut and protesters arrested.
If someone thinks that they are heinous criminals and need to be put away somewhere, I think they're just fooling themselves. They're ready to serve their time. Their conscience will remain free.
Hey, tree climbers!
5 others climbed and set up camp in nearby trees that are to be cut. Deputies say they'll wait them out while a crane is being brought in to get the woman atop the yarder down from her perch. In the North Kalmiopsis, Ed Teachout reporting. At 5:30 this morning, the co-founder of the nationwide environmental group Earth First got released from the Josephine County Jail. Mike Roselle served 14 days for trespassing on a Siskiyou National Forest timber operation. While Roselle's been locked up, other Earth Firsters have been protesting outside. Their goal is to stop the U.S. government's policy of harvesting old-growth timber as a renewable resource.
These are irreplaceable national treasures, and it's not a renewable resource, and we feel it's a horrible crime that's being committed, and we feel our actions are totally justified.
3 tree sitters who have been illegally perched in the North Kalmiopsis, an area Earth First once made a national park, say they came down after Roselle was released.
You know, for now I'm tired of sitting in a tree, so I'll work on some other action. But I'll be back in a tree someday.
So-called actions have resulted in 72 arrests, including stopping road construction, tree sitting, protesters chaining themselves to a yarder, and burying themselves into a Forest Service gate. Even though this demonstration is a peaceful one, Earth Firsters say they're willing to go further to accomplish their cause. Some say they'll even go as far as laying their life on the line.
They're out there destroying life, and this is the best way we can draw attention to it, but we're willing to risk our lives and risk our freedom for this cause, and that's why I think that eventually we'll win this cause.
The Siskiyou National Forest 10-year plan is to be out within 3 weeks, which will give the public a chance to comment on how the North Kalmiopsis is managed. In the meantime, Earth Firsters say they will continue their campaign to stop the logging. In Grants Pass, Ed Teachout, Newswatch 12.
David Jackson meets 2 men willing to go to jail to put Earth first.
They've been seen perched atop giant redwood trees, refusing to come down. They've hung banners on smokestacks and waste disposal pipes protesting industrial pollution. Some have even plastered their message across the face of Mount Rushmore, warning the world of the dangers of acid rain. They're radical environmentalists and members of the organization Earth First, and they believe man is ruining our planet.
Our feeling is that large corporations interested in short-term profits are destroying the American Earth. In fact, the entire Earth, the rainforests, the Arctic regions, the oceans, wherever, and we're going to do whatever we can to stop that destruction.
Dave Foreman founded Earth First in the late 1970s. From day one, it was designed to be a militant environmental movement made up of people unafraid to fight for the rights of the Earth.
Thomas Jefferson said that certainly one of the highest duties of the citizen is a scrupulous obedience to the laws of the nation, but it is not the highest duty.
What's the highest duty?
I think the highest duty is to do what is right.
Foreman's latest fight for what he believes is right has netted him an arrest for allegedly conspiring to blow up power lines leading to a controversial Arizona water project. Mike Roselle, another Earth First founder, still holds out hope that the Glen Canyon Dam can be removed and Utah's Lake Powell drained.
I think it was the biggest environmental catastrophe ever perpetrated by the U.S. government, and they had all the arguments and all the reasons not to do it. But again, this issue of jobs comes up, and you know, for 5 or 10 years worth of jobs, we dammed up probably the most important wilderness area in the entire Southwest.
But Roselle has ruled out the use of violent force.
Oh, I don't think that we have any history of involvement with firearms or explosives or incendiary devices or any of those tools of, you know, the modern-day terrorist. We certainly like to see the dam demolished, you know, but I don't think there's anyone that I know is willing to go in there and try to blow it up.
Mike Roselle was arrested 2 years ago for putting a huge banner across Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. It was to protest acid rain, and it landed Roselle in jail for 4 months. But for anybody truly committed to radical environmentalism, jail is not an unfamiliar place.
Now, you're not afraid to go to jail, are you?
Certainly not.
And you've done it?
You bet. I spent 4 months in jail last year, and that was probably the 15th time in the last 10 years that I've been in jail for my actions.
Roselle's San Francisco office is also the home now of the Rainforest Action Network. That's a group fighting timber cutting all over the world. The Rainforest Network teamed up with Earth First last week to protest timber sales in 7 western states. Those sales depend on cutting on public lands. So in this case, the target of Earth First is the U.S. government. Perhaps surprisingly, the Forest Service is not opposed to radical environmentalists.
In the earlier days, the Forest Service was part of a developing nation, whether that was mining, water, power, dams, or timber. And as time goes on, you know, I think society is gradually shifting more toward a point of view that we need to conserve more of these resources for the future, and we're responding to that.
It's good news to people like Roselle and Dave Foreman. 10 years ago, they thought the time was right to break the law if necessary to fight for the earth. And they have seen some victories along the way in conjunction with organizations like Greenpeace, things that have prevented whale slaughter and seal slaughter and even the harvesting of some timber. And now, 10 years later, they're convinced that they've done the right thing.
In the history of the human race, we have risen many times to meet serious challenges, and I think this is one time where we're going to have to do it because it may be the last crisis that we're able to face.
I don't know if any of us are going to achieve something, but we aren't going to roll over and play dead and let industrialism destroy this planet that we love.
Of course, there are many people who don't agree at all with the goals or the methods of Earth First.
They say not only do their actions threaten jobs in this country, they also endanger lives.
Take, for example, the practice of driving large spikes into trees to prevent anyone from cutting them down. That has resulted in at least one serious injury.
Despite the fact we obviously do not condone their methods, we do applaud their goal to save this earth.
KOIN-TV, Portland, Vancouver. The #1 news station for Oregon and Southwest Washington. Mike Donahue, Shirley Hancock, Bill Volker with weather, and Rick Metzger sports. Newsroom 6 at 5.
This tree here is 731 years old, and it's been around the country to promote preservation of old growth.
Environmentalists truck an old-growth tree to the city.
Oregon's Liver Transplant Center is one of only 2 of its kind.
And a 9-year-old pilot flies into Hillsboro, breaking a record. Good evening, I'm Shirley Hancock.
I'm Mike Donahue. We have reports tonight that Oregon timber companies are turning to Canada as a source for logs. A federal judge has opened some Northwest forests to cutting, but local dollars are chasing trees across the border.
Peter Murphy is standing by now at Waterfront Park, where there's a huge rally going on to drum up support to save the owl and its old-growth habitat. Peter, local companies buying raw materials from Canada doesn't sound like encouraging news for the economy.
No, it's not encouraging news to the people who are in the industry either. And basically what it means is that a lot of our dollars and many of our jobs are now going to Canada. Now, even though Judge Helen Fry has decided that about a half a dozen sales may proceed, her decision hasn't put any more logs into local mills. In fact, environmentalists are saying they're going to appeal her decision, so there may be no real relief in sight whatsoever. It means that companies like Stone Forest Product Industries in Albany will continue to buy plywood veneer from Canada to keep their nearly 400 workers employed.
And it's probably not a good move. Why not? Because it takes U.S. dollars out, and it increases the trade deficit.
The main hope for relief from the current log shortage in the industry lies in further decisions such as Fry's that release public timber for sale.
If Judge Fry's decision is a forerunner or leads the way to further decisions along the same line, then that is welcome news to us.
Judge Fry ruled that a prohibition against lawsuits challenging existing BLM sales is valid. But environmentalists say her similar rulings have been overruled before.
And we think that it's been interpreted another way already by the Ninth Circuit, saying that our appeal was allowable under this rider, and that's why we're going to go back to them and why we expect a better decision this time around.
The rally at Waterfront Park is only one of dozens being held across the country to further the cause of the conservationists. They called upon writer Ken Kesey to drive home their principal point.
The loggers have got to realize that if we stop doing what we're doing right now, we just said, okay, take it, take it, take it. How much have they got left? 5 years, 7 years?
Now, since this is a fairly complicated issue, let me try and explain it again. Judge Fry has decided that a legal prohibition against challenging BLM sales is okay. Environmentalists say they've won on that issue before at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and that's why they're going back. Mike, Shirley?
Well, Peter, how did we get this no challenge law?
This was something that Senator Hatfield included as what's called a rider to a different bill altogether. That bill, plus the rider, was passed by Congress and then signed by the president. Now, it may, as a result, make things kind of interesting on the federal level. You have one federal agency, the BLM, which is doing everything it can to start sales of old-growth timber, and you have another federal agency, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, trying to slow those sales down.
Thank you, Peter. Peter Murphy in Waterfront.
Channel 7 News at 5.
And a good afternoon. I'm Don Sanchez with Willie Monroe. Cheryl Jennings has the day off.
The environmental group Earth First was back in the woods today. Members climbing trees near Fort Bragg in an effort to stop what they call the destruction of America's forests. The group accuses the timber and paper companies of raping the forests and U.S. Forestry Department of selling out to those companies. Those protests are nationwide.
This is a part of the national tree set that's been organized to help try and bring America's awareness of the deforestation of the North American continent and the impact that it has on the world, on the greenhouse effect, the loss of topsoil, and the demise of biological diversity.
So far, the environmentalists have not directly prevented the chopping down of trees. Earth First accuses the lumber giant Georgia Pacific of deforesting large parts of the Northwest. Today, a company spokesman told Channel 7, anyone can sit in a tree and make allegations. We believe we conduct prudent forest management.
Now, Channel 7 News at 6.
The fight to save redwoods and other trees in the Northwest shifted to Mendocino today. There, environmental activists took to trees near a lumber operation in Fort Bragg. Ed Leslie has the latest in their nationwide crusade.
It's quite peaceful, yet quite disturbing at the same time.
That is 23-year-old Jenny Dalton, one of 3 women hanging out in redwood treetops to protest certain logging practices, especially the clear-cutting going on around Fort Bragg. Members of the somewhat radical environmental group Earth First, a self-described tribe of earth warriors, are currently occupying dozens of treetops in at least 7 states. Here in part is why.
They're raping and pillaging this county so that when they pull out, when they finish doing this to our entire county, there won't be jobs, there won't be livelihoods around here. We will have been totally raped.
The U.S. Forest Service and the timber industry are male-dominated, which reflects our capitalistic society, and that they've been destroying our whole life support system, and this clear cut is just one way that they're doing that, and we'd like them to quit.
The women have been up in the trees since about roughly 4 a.m. Monday. The plan is to be up there for about a week, but the decision as to when to come down is to be a personal one. And that's just exactly what happened suddenly and unexpectedly today.
Yeah, they just gotta let it slip through your hand. There you go.
31-year-old Pamela McManus of San Diego was brought down from the tree on the ruse that she was needed on the ground for news interviews. And after a shaky descent, she was congratulated and then told the news that her mother had just fallen grievously ill in Chicago. They obviously didn't want her to know that during her climb down. As for the other 2 women, they planned to spend their 4th night tonight dangling 75 feet above the forest floor. Near Fort Bragg, Mendocino County, Ed Leslie, Channel 7 News.
One of the targets of the protesters is lumber giant Georgia Pacific. A company spokesman in Fort Bragg told Channel 7 News today, quote, "Anyone can sit in a tree and make allegations. We believe we conduct prudent forest management." He added, "It's preposterous to say we have a cut-and-run policy. If we did, we wouldn't grow so many trees."
Our erratic weather. Well, today the group tried to disrupt lumber operations. And News Center 4's Mark Jones has that story.
Keep coming. All right, a little bit more.
It is mid-morning near Mendocino. Their identities are unknown. The group is Earth First. Its goal, to end the clear-cutting of California's redwood forest. They will climb to the top and tree sit for days. With people on top, loggers will be unable to cut the trees down. Earth First claims the cutting and clearing of forest is causing the Earth's greenhouse effect, raising the Earth's temperature, destroying Mother Nature's lungs, the Earth's forest. In the Amazon, every 2 years, forests the size of California disappear. To prevent that here, Earth First has spiked trees to jam logger saws. The protests are being held throughout California and in Oregon, Washington State, Montana, Colorado, New Mexico, and Massachusetts. Mill Valley, regional headquarters for the Pacific Lumber Company. 24 protesters target California's largest milling operation. Inside, no comment from company officials. Shortly after noon, the protest circle breaks. The protesters surround Pacific Lumber Company. The company closes its window shades and covers its doors with paper. There are no arrests. Brian Gaffney is one of the protesters.
You see this escalating to a more violent extreme.
We're fighting for life. I hope that we never see any bloodshed. I don't know from which side it could come. If a tree sitter at some point could be hurt by a logger, or a logger hurt by an adamant extremist.
The protests are expected to continue all week. Wednesday, the protesters say they will take on the real culprits, the U.S. Forest Service. Mark Jones, News Center 4.
Back of that road there's stacked up all kinds of little tree tops and hardwood, twisted eucalyptus, all kinds of stuff that's got no business on a log deck, but that ought to be in the forest. I want to point out that we're not here to protest against either the loggers or the mill workers or anyone who is an employee of Louisiana Pacific. They don't have any more control over these logging practices than we do. At the beginning of the logging season, Louisiana Pacific called a meeting in Willits of the people who are going to be logging for them and explained their new logging practices. And I want you to know that their own employees or people who are contracting for them, many of them are just as disgusted with this as we are. That's how we found out about a lot of this stuff. One comment from one old timer was, when they start telling us to take the tops of the trees, we know it's the end. So the person we're here to protest is not the loggers and not the mill workers. It's the the president of Louisiana Pacific, a man named Harry Merlo.
Oh.
Harry Merlo! Harry Merlo is the ultimate tree Nazi. He wants to cut every last tree and implement the final solution of wafer board in our county. Now, you've all heard this quote, but I'm going to read it again, because you can't say anything about Harry Merlo as bad as what Harry Merlo says about himself. We can thank Mike Janella, the press Democrat, for coming up with this quote. In interviewing Harry Merlo about his logging practice, Harry had this to say. You know, it always annoyed me to leave anything on the ground when I log our own land. There shouldn't be anything left on the ground. We need everything that's out there. We don't log to a 10-inch top, or an 8-inch top, or a 6-inch top. We log to infinity, because we need it all. It's out there, it's ours, and we need it all. Now, this maniac is actually in charge of most of the forest land in Mendocino County. Bigfoot here has some astounding photos of what logging to infinity means. He can give some to some of you press people, and maybe if you all want to see it, you can look around.
May I ask a question? Do they pull stumps?
You can look at it. You can look at it and see. Yeah, they pull stumps too. There's stumps in there too. Here, I need to be able to face press, so if you could try to go there. Okay, so what we're dealing with here is a man who not only does not obey the laws of humans as far as forestry practices, this man does not even believe in the laws of nature. Any farmer knows that you can't keep taking out of the soil without putting back into the soil. But Harry Merlo has not yet discovered this basic principle of nature. 50% of the organic matter on the ground in a natural forest is decaying wood. Yet Harry Merlo wants to remove all this wood. His plan then, he says, is to strip everything off the ground, leave it completely bare, and replant tree farms with 20-year rotations. Now, according to Chris Mazer, the forestry expert, there has been no tree farm that has ever survived beyond 3 generations. Without putting something into the soil gets poorer and poorer, and the trees just don't grow back. So what he's talking about, if he implements his plan, is desertification in 60 years. That's why we're here. That's why this is so serious. Now, Merlo says, don't worry about the fact that we got hardwoods and slash and stuff out on that deck. It's okay. We're going to replant it all with conifers. We're going to replant it with Doug fir, a much better saw log, a much better tree. Well, what he's talking about is monoculture. He's talking about eliminating biodiversity. Now, right now, one of the things that's happening is that they're exporting logs to Japan, who are paying a much higher price. The reason Japan is willing to pay for this wood is because they've already destroyed their own forests. And what they did is they took the United States Forestry's advice and replanted their forests as tree farms, monoculture tree farms, all with pines. Several years later, much to their dismay, they were attacked by an infestation of pine beetles, destroying this monoculture farm. In a natural forest, there's enough diversity that something like a pine beetle won't destroy the whole ecosystem. In a tree farm in monoculture, that doesn't exist. The people in Japan saw it as an infestation of pine beetles. Nature saw it as an infestation of pine trees. The other thing that Harry Merlo's not dealing with when he says he owns this land and can do what he wants to is the climate. We all know about the greenhouse effect. We all know what this is doing to our climate. I saw something really dismaying in the entire press Democrat just 2 days ago. It was an advertisement for a new product called a solar prism. It says, protects your garden against 120-degree heat. Now this here where I live is called Redwood Valley, and there's hardly a redwood left in it. And last year it hit 115 on the clear cut where I live. And I know it didn't hit any 115 when there were redwood trees there. So what we're seeing here is a changing of the climate, we're seeing a drying up of the land, and we're seeing the greenhouse effect taking in. Now there's people over there with No Earth First shirts on, and one of their favorite things they like to holler about is jobs. I'd like to see these people defend wafer board, because what we're talking about eliminating is not just the forest, but also the forest jobs. They just closed down the Potter Valley sawmill just over in the next valley over very recently. And that sawmill employed 132 people. Subsequently, they opened this chip plant, which employs 8 people. And that's what we're looking at. It doesn't take a logger to harvest a tree farm. It's done with machinery. We're talking about toxic jobs. Just to show you how sensitive Harry Merlo is to the job situation, here's his comment on the Potter Valley Mill. I feel sorry for Potter Valley and all the people that are there, but when you look at the total picture, our future is so bright, even though some product lines are at their end. Well, I don't know whose future he thinks is so bright, certainly not the Potter Valley Mill workers. When he says product lines are at their end, we're not talking product lines, we're talking about trees and forests that they're at their end. There's no benefit from wafer board. There's no benefit. Here's an example of it over here. This is a totally inferior product. If you want your house built out of this stuff, that's more than I can say. Some earth firsters may say they don't want any logging at all. And I'm not really sure if human beings can log and still have the forest there or not. I do feel like we have to base our society on what the earth can sustain, not try to strip everything we can off the earth without worrying about the future. If this is the future, I don't want to be here for it. There's no benefit to this strip logging except for the greedy millionaire of Harry Merlo. Harry is practicing the economics of extinction, but we got a surprise for him in Mendocino County. He's about to run into the politics of resistance.
Yeah!
We don't recognize Harry Merlo's claim to ownership of beings that are 2,000 years old, beings that his existence is a blip in their history. We don't recognize his right to strip the forest and leave us nothing and to strip our children's future. The logs of the forest don't belong to Harry Merlo. The forest belong to the ages. The logs on that log deck don't belong to Harry Merlo. They belong to the future. They belong to our children. They belong to the forest creatures who need them for a habitat. We're not going to let Harry Merlo chip up our county to satiate his greed. Harry Merlo last, Earth first.
That thing in front to zoom in, and it's going to focus on whatever's in the little rectangle. It's got autofocus. You see a little rectangle?
Yes.
Yeah.
You're in focus.
Good.
And you're up real close.
All right. Oh! If you want to go wide, and then I'll climb up.
Okay.
Out of the picture or something.
Go ahead.
Yeah, soon. What do I have, about 30 feet to the dirt? And that little 1-inch black and white viewfinder. just a little down there, Greg.
Torrential rain and mudslides have left thousands of people homeless. And the capital of Caracas and neighboring areas have been hit hard. Much of Venezuela is paralyzed. Most banks, businesses, and government offices are closed. Coming up, we'll tell you where this woman spent the last 2 years of her life and why. But first, a look at the national extended weather forecast. A woman who spent the past 2 years living in a redwood tree is back on solid ground. Julia Butterfly Hill came down from her 18-story high perch after reaching an agreement to save the 600-year-old tree from loggers.
I understand that all of us are governed by different values, and I understand that to some people I'm just a dirty tree-hugging hippie, but I can't imagine being able to take a chainsaw to something like this. I don't understand.
We, in an element to protect her health, I think, is really the reason we're reaching the agreement. She is paying us $50,000 for the tree and for the 200-foot buffer area around the tree. But it is a unique situation.
The 25-year-old lived on a plywood platform under a tarp, had food hoisted to her, and bathed from a bucket. A spokeswoman for Hill says it will take time for her to get used to walking again.
After living in an ancient redwood tree for 2 years, environmental activist Julia Hill has returned to Earth. Don Knapp has more on her unusual effort to save old-growth forests.
Julia Butterfly Hill finally came down. More than 2 years after she climbed this 600-year-old redwood she calls Luna to defend it with her life. Despite Northern California's cold, wet winters, nearby logging and threatening helicopters, the protest Hill thought might last a month stretched out for 738 days. Now it's ended with environmentalists agreeing to pay Pacific Lumber $50,000 for the tree and a buffer zone.
Well, I think the key part of our reaching this decision is her own safety. She has been up there 2 years. We're approaching another severe winter. We're concerned about her health and welfare, as we have been from the very beginning.
Life is a never-ending lesson of letting go.
Hill has won a small battle in a long, hard war to save some of the last remaining privately owned ancient redwoods. Last March, state and federal governments agreed to pay $480 million to Maxam Corporation, owner of the Headwaters Forest, to save it from logging. But environmentalists protested the deal, claiming it was too much money for too few trees and failed to protect other old-growth forests.
To some people, I'm just a dirty tree-hugging hippie. But I can't imagine being able to take a chainsaw to something like this. I think before anyone should ever be allowed to cut down trees like this, they should be mandated to live in it for 2 years.
Hill says her tree sit convinced her to lead a life of service. But for now, she's just enjoying small physical pleasures, like the feel of cold mud on her bare feet.
It feels so good to be alive on this earth.
Don Knapp, CNN.
Her name is Butterfly, but it's not flowers she loves, it's trees.
Tonight, this activist is explaining why she's finally coming down after 2 years sitting at the top of a tree. She lived in a tree for 2 years in a personal crusade to save ancient redwoods. Now, Julia Hill has set foot on solid ground once again after winning a partial victory. For 738 days, this 25-year-old woman refused to leave her perch, hoping to stop Pacific Lumber from harvesting old-growth redwood trees. The company wouldn't do that, but it finally agreed to spare the 600-year-old tree Julia Hill occupied, along with a 200-foot buffer zone around it. Overcome with emotion as she reached solid ground once again, Julia felt her quest was not in vain.
Oh, we did it. We did it. Oh, my God.
For 2 years, she braved the elements, sleeping under a tarp on an 8-foot-wide plywood platform. She bathed using a bucket. Food and supplies were hauled up by rope. Television crews from around the world visited her.
I think before anyone should ever be allowed to cut down trees like this, they should be mandated to live in it for 2 years.
The clear-cutting of old redwood forest leaves the land looking like this. The practice is legal, and it will continue.
All the companies, including Pacific Lumber Company, live up to the law and the regulations and do it in a very, very good way.
But last year, Pacific Lumber's license was suspended when it violated state regulations. Julia and her supporters will pay Pacific Lumber $50,000 in lost logging revenue as part of the agreement to preserve the tree and the immediate area. Hers was a long and lonely ordeal, but Julia Hill's voice was heard around the world.
But I've done everything I know in these 2 years to share it with people so that we can have a world one day where a person doesn't have to live in an ancient tree for 2 years for it to be protected.
In March, Pacific Lumber signed an agreement with the state and federal governments to turn 10,000 acres of forest into a public preserve. The company will donate Julia's $50,000 to forestry studies.
Yeah.
There's no rectangles in there, is there?
No what?
Rectangle in the viewfinder?
No, not yet. No
Okay.
rectangle.
Stop it for a second.
How do I do that?
Right.
Right there, put a little red light in it.
Yeah, you can turn that.
Yeah, there's no push up and over to your right.
Up and over.
Thanks, Tim.
See that?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, then we make sure the camera's wound. So it is wound.
Yeah, they're too smart to stay away from him.
Yeah. Okay, whenever you're ready, push the trigger like you normally take in and move your hand away from the camera so it'll be steady.
And I was on the beach.
Yeah.
Almost.